We're going to talk about the Serpent Men and, incidentally, Yig. So first, who are these guys? Who are the Serpent Men? We're going to talk about the Serpent Men and Yig, and I know it's kind of odd that they're Serpent Men instead of the Serpent Folk, but hey, that's how they're always referred to, so we'll do that. Now, the Serpent Men figure prominently in the stories of Clark Ashton Smith and Robert E. Howard, and they don't exactly appear in Lovecraft stories, but they're mentioned and talked about, and there's references. Now, this image by Mark Ferrari is one of my favorites, and I think it does a great job of making it clear that these are snakes, not lizard men. In Clark Ashton Smith stories, the Serpent Men are ruthless scientists with alchemy and poisons and all kinds of things like that, way beyond the reach of modern men. Now, Robert E. Howard shows them as almost exclusively magical. They are the major enemy for his hero, King Kull, and they often masquerade as human in his stories, which makes them very useful for a Call of Cthulhu game. Now, Karl Edward Wagner wrote a great novel, Legion from the Shadows, in which Serpent Men, mostly degenerate limited types, figure importantly. Now, all of these tales and stories have some common elements. We can look through them all and piece together the Serpent Man story. Clearly, in the distant past, Serpent Men were an important intelligent race. Now, Robert E. Howard's Serpent Men say they are before the dinosaurs, which implies they somehow survived for 200 million years in obscurity. Other works claim the same thing, so let's go with that. They go back 200 million years. Now, Lovecraft said that the intelligent beings of the red-lit cavern of Yoth, who are now probably extinct, were reptilian. I added them to my Cthulhu Wars game, and I gave them this repulsive shape. My theory is that these could have evolved from Serpent Men. Over 200 million years, they can make a lot of changes, right? Now, let's look at the geological situation we're dealing with here, okay? Now, we all know the Serpent Men are back here before the Mesozoic. They couldn't have shown up much earlier because reptiles, which they are, only started to show up in the Carboniferous. Now, the end of the Permian was a gigantic extinction event, so that's when the flying polyps arrived and nearly exterminated all Earth life, including the Serpent Men. That's probably when their civilization collapsed. Now, the Yithians come in at this point, and they take over the native race of mollusks, which is apparently pretty minor, and they war on the flying polyps about this time, and they drive them underground. Then the Yithians rule the surface world for the next 100 million years throughout the Mesozoic. Now, the elder things existed through all this time. They're actually older than the Yithians. Than the Serpent Men, but they seem to be secondary at this time period. They don't seem to be something that the Yithians are worried about. Maybe when they were around during the Serpent Men era, the Serpent Men worried about them. Who knows? Anyway, at the end of the Mesozoic is the extinction of the dinosaurs with Chicxulub. Well, naturally, we know that this means the flying polyps came out and they exterminated the dinosaurs. They probably call in the meteor at Chicxulub, or possibly the Yithians use it as an attempt to hit back anyway, whatever. There's a meteor strike too. There's all these volcanoes erupting in Asia, and the Yithians are destroyed, the dinosaurs are destroyed, and then the flying polyps go back underground and they don't really come out again. Now, the elder things then come back from the shadows, and they rule a lot of the Earth during the age of mammals, the Cenozoic. They also do have to fight against both the Migo and the Starspawn. Eventually, the Migo kind of retreat, maybe because of the Ice Age, who knows. Anyway, finally, the elder things become decadent, and they retreat to Antarctica, and they're finally finished off by the Shoggoth Rebellion. At this point, the Serpent Men seize their chance, and they establish a short-lived empire here in the Pliocene, which is again wiped out by the Ice Age, and the Ice Age also gives rise to modern humans, and now we're in charge. Now, you see on this chart that snakes show up in the middle of the Mesozoic. This is like 60 million years or something, 40 million years after the Serpent Men were around. There's no snakes there's no serpents when the Serpent Men appear. Now, there's legless amphibians. They go clear back to the Carboniferous, but those are not reptiles, they're amphibians. And on the other hand, Serpent Men have arms and legs. How are they serpents? They have wiggly bodies, but what's going on here? Now, in addition, we know that there are these degenerate Serpent Men types, dwarfed things that are supposed to be interbreeding with humans, which is, of course, impossible. Humans can only breed with humans. Now, on the other hand, the Serpent Men had amazing advanced biological science. Could they have merged some human genes with the Serpent Man genes for a reason? Now, the degenerate serpent folk are always described as dwarf-like, deformed, mottled hide, sometimes a little bit hairy, sometimes not, and they have limited intelligence. They lurk in dark corners of the world. They only come out to kidnap people and steal things. They don't seem to have a standard shape. Some of them have poisonous bites. They might be connected to the Miri Negri of Shogner Fawn's tales, which are humanoids formed from amphibian or reptile flesh, which that would qualify, right? If snake people, that's a humanoid made from amphibian or reptile flesh. They're very negri. Now, always it's said that a few of the original super intelligent serpent men stayed alive during all this time, thanks to sorcery, biological science, alchemy. These are always leaders and rulers of whatever degenerate group of serpent men are around. Now, we also know that the serpent men are never a threat to the Yithians. When they came to Earth, all they cared about was the flying polyps preying on Earth life. Presumably, the Serpent Man civilization was destroyed by the polyps before the time of the Yithians. The Serpent Men never resurged during the eons of Yithian domination. The Yithians are too much for them. My guess is that when the civilization was destroyed, which happened at least twice, it also happens during the Ice Age, that the super intelligent immortal sorcerers go into hiding and they plot a return for when the time is right, when these darn Yithians are gone. This also explains why they've kept the same body shape so long. It's not that the Serpent Men couldn't evolve, it's that the sorcerers from like the Permian are still alive, and they tried to reproduce their body shape when they wanted to reestablish their civilization. Now, we can view the Serpent Men as a secondary super race. They can't really compete with the big guys, like the Elder Things, the Star Spawn, the Yithians, but when nothing else is cluttering up the surface, they emerge and try to recreate their nation. Now, of course, they aren't really serpents. They evolved before the Triassic, and there weren't any serpents. Plus, they have limbs, arms, and legs. They're, in effect, semi-erect bipeds. Now, bipeds is a body form that's really rare. Yeah, humans have it, but there's not that many other bipeds besides humans. I guess there's birds, but birds walking is a secondary source for most of them. Now, I imagine the Serpent Men, that are often portrayed in their hind legs to look like people, probably frequently moved on all fours. Now, my belief is that in their long eons underground, hiding from the Yithians, hiding from the Elder Things, hiding from the Star Spawn, hiding from the other things, that the Serpent Men created snakes. Snakes are a weird animal, and there's not a lot of evidence of how they evolved. Why would anything get rid of its arms and legs? It just seems weird. There's a lot of theories about this, but if the Serpent Men made them for a purpose, it becomes more sensible. In other words, they are called Serpent Men not because they evolved from serpents, but because serpents evolved from them. They gave rise to the serpents. So that's what I'm thinking there. Now, let us consider Yig. Now, Yig is a pretty weird name for a Lovecraft entity. Usually Lovecraft's creatures have long, multi-syllable, vaguely Hebrew-sounding names. Well, Yig appeared in one of those stories where Lovecraft edits another person's work, in this case, Zealia Bishop. She worked with Lovecraft for 3 stories: The Curse of Yig, Medusa's Coil, and The Mound. Now, The Mound is the tale where the Yothans show up, and it gives rise to the Ancients. It has lots of lore, not a great story, lots of lore. Medusa's Coil is kind of a weird story about unnatural hair, legends of the Gorgon. I'll also mention that Medusa's Coil is like super racist, but this seems to be Zealia Bishop's fault and her idea, not Lovecraft. I mean, not that Lovecraft wasn't racist, he didn't put the racism in the story. He added the Cthulhu cult, he added other supernatural elements. I mean, Zelia's terrifying revelation at the end of the story, which I don't mind spoiling, is that the cursed evil sorceress had like a teeny tiny trace of black ancestry. Whoop-de-doo. What's less scary than that? Lovecraft, though I agree he was racist, wouldn't have cared about a tiny drop of black blood. He was a scientific racist, you know, not a old school Southern person that can't imagine any single taint. Now, I'll also mention in passing that Zealia Bishop was keen on the history of Clay County, Missouri, and wrote lots of books about this. Now, as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, sometimes called the Mormons, we know about Clay County because that's where the villains came from who brutalized and murdered the early members of our church. Not my ancestors, but my wife's. Now, I don't know what Zealia Bishop wrote about Clay County, but if she's glorifying these guys, it makes me even more not a fan of Mrs. Bishop. But anyway, she gave money to Lovecraft, and his parts of the stories are pretty good. So, on to Yig. So Yig is supposedly an American Indian god of rattlesnakes. Again, what kind of elder god is this? He's not from outer space. He's not from another dimension. He's the god of snakes? Really? Plus, even in my own stories, I have Yig working with Serpent Men. I mean, everyone pairs Yigs with Serpent Men. But the fact is that Yig, god of snakes, wouldn't have appeared until, there were snakes. 50 million years after the Serpent Men. We also know that in most of the stories of Serpent Men, they are strict atheists. They have no gods at all. At least the original intelligent Serpent Men are atheists. The lower degenerate ones worship all kinds of things. They worship Sathagawa, Shog-Nar-Fan, like really degenerate things. Ugh. So anyway, my idea is that the Serpent Men, sometime during the Mesozoic, used their biological science and sorcery to create Yig, perhaps as a worship object for the degenerate descendants, perhaps as a tool, and this would explain why Yig is such an odd man out among the other great old ones. He's artificial. It also explains why of all the gods, the Serpent Men are willing to work with Yig. He's theirs, and presumably he does the things they programmed him to do. Now, he may have grown beyond that original programming, he may have a will of his own now, but there we have it. A monstrous synthetic god, Yig, a race with a small scattering of surviving immortal scientists and magicians waiting for the chance to resurge. Perhaps they feel with the passing of the Yithians and the Elder Things, they finally have their chance to come back. And after all, certainly they should be able to defeat mere primates. No?